Good morning, everybody. So my name's Alistair Coss. I'm the new Business Development Director at Delaware, and my background is about 20 years in distribution and about 18 years in the IT industry. And I'm very pleased to introduce Sean Cooley, who's our keynote speaker today. Sean is a business transformation expert, author of the book Transition Point: From Steam to Singularity, which I'm reading, would highly recommend to everybody. A visiting fellow of the Cranfield School of Management and Cranfield University, and a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport. This is the third in the series of our webinars today, and I'm really pleased you're able to join us for what I'm sure will be a very interesting and informative and enjoyable webinar. Regarding questions today, because there's quite a lot of content to get through, please can you put them into the chat or contact us directly? Be very happy to pick them up. If we do end up with time at the end of it, Sean will run through any of the questions that he's able to cover immediately, but we will get back to you. So I'm going to hand over to Sean. Sean, thank you very much, and I'll shut up at this point.
Thank you very much, Alistair. Good morning, everyone. Give me 2 seconds. I'll just share my screen. Alistair, if you can just confirm that you can see that okay?
Yeah, without any problems.
Fantastic. Thank you once again, everyone. As mentioned, this is the third webinar in a series of 3. This one's called Becoming Anti-Fragile, Learn to Thrive in Disruptive Times. So you can see the first webinar we did a couple of months ago, which talked about why everything is so disruptive right now. I'm going to just go through a little bit of that webinar and the second webinar before we get on to this one, just to give you a bit of background for anyone who wasn't in there. So that first webinar looked at that issue. It talked about the fact that we're going through this period that a lot of people sort of call VUCA, but the question that I've always had is, why is it VUCA right now? Why is it so volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous? I'm going to ask the question that if 89% of chief supply chain officers believe we're living in a VUCA environment, what do the other 11% think is going on? Because we are indeed going through a period of massive disruptive change right now, but it's just one of many periods of very disruptive change that we as Homo sapiens have been through, specifically in the West. And if you look at these 3 particular charts that we've got here, you can see that we've got 3 graphs that almost look identical. They are showing an exponential growth in the number of people on the planet, the wealth we generated, and actually even the wealth per person that's increased. So the big question, of course, is what happened at that apex point to enable such an exponential period of change to happen? And of course, what happened was effectively we industrialized. The Industrial Revolution first started in the UK, then moved on to Germany, US, Japan, now involves the world. One of the things I then discussed in that webinar was the fact that change is cyclical, not linear. Which is a really interesting element if you understand the nature of that change, because we talk a lot about boom and bust in terms of economic cycles, but actually business cycles are predominantly driven by technological innovations and waves of what are known as creative destruction. The creation of a new technological paradigm destroys the old one. And I've been talking about this now for over a decade. A lot of it came from sort of research that I did in the book Transition Point. And we've been going up the upswing period of the 6th wave. We're now in the 6th wave. Each upswing period contains 2 phases with a really disruptive middle part. The first phase is where new inventions happen. We get the installation of new technologies, but they don't cause a massive sort of revolution, but they do cause a lot of disruption because people get excited about these new technologies and a lot of money makes its way towards it. And we saw, lots of excitement around autonomous vehicles, around drone deliveries, around blockchain, around AI, all these things back in the sort of mid to late 2010s, but we didn't really see a revolution happening there. The second phase is where the revolution happens. It's where we stop looking at technologies as ways to do the same thing but with more efficiency, and instead start to think about how we can radically transform the way we do things. So in the first webinar, I used the example that in the first wave, The invention was the steam engine, which is why my book was called From Steam to the Singularity. So it's James Watt doing some improvements to Thomas Newcomen's atmospheric engine, creating a new mechanism of generating power. But the way we used that was to, be able to go deeper in coal mountains to extract more coal from it. So it was an efficiency saving, really. It created us the ability to dig for coal more efficiently. The real revolution happened when we took that steam engine, realized it could be used to power other things, put it on top of a track with some wheels underneath it, and suddenly we've got a transportation revolution. So the second phase is when we look at these technologies, and it enables us to reimagine how things are done. Now, as I mentioned, we're currently in this period that goes on between the two phases. So the person who's probably done the most research into what they call these sort of technological surges or upswings is Carlota Perez. She calls it the turning point. In my book, I call it the transition period. But this is when basically things get really hairy, if I can use that. It's when all the wars happen. It's when all the social revolutions happen. It's where you get a paradigm shift battle between the new and the old, between conservatism and progressivism, and all the things that we're seeing play out right now. And at that point in time, these economies and the societies that are affected, and right now with obviously in a completely globalized world, so pretty much everyone is affected, goes through a period of great fragility. Right now, I think it's very fair to say that most people's personal finances are feeling a bit fragile. Our supply chains are fragile. We've realised that offshoring and outsourcing creates a low-cost supply chain, but not a very agile or resilient one. Therefore, energy and food supplies are fragile. Our economies feel a bit fragile. Peace is obviously very fragile. Democracies feel fragile. Ecosystems is fragile. So we're going through a time of great fragility, which is not the most inspiring of messages. But the interesting thing is, we've been here before. And in the first webinar, I talked about examples in the 1970s where exactly the same sorts of headlines were happening right now. The other thing I talked about in the first webinar was Amara's law. Now, this is something that you can see playing out all the time. So in the first phase of the upswing, we tend to overestimate the impact of technologies, but we underestimate the long term. So in phase one, we see something like autonomous vehicles. So back in 2012, Google was driving around with its Priuses with little LiDARs on top. And you thought, well, that's a prototype. Give it 5 years. We're all going to be driving around in autonomous cars. Because 2017 came and went, and we're now into 2024, and we're still not driving around in autonomous cars. But that doesn't mean we're not going to be. So we tend to overestimate the impact in the short term, but massively underestimate the impact in the long term. Because once we get that technology working, it's not just going to be cars, it's going to be planes, it's going to be boats, it's going to be a whole host of different things, which will completely change the transportation paradigm, and things like whether or not we own cars as an asset or whether or not we just have access to transportation. And we're right in this apex. So the message really is, again, not particularly the most inspiring message, which is, if you think things have been transformative so far, you really haven't seen anything yet. And to give you an example, and this is an example of autonomous vehicles. In phase one, what we saw was the emergence of the technology. We got this massive hype of overinflated expectations, and then the innovation fails to appear and it enters a sort of trough of disillusionment. So, some of the headlines we saw from, the sort of mid to late to the 2010s around autonomous vehicles, and some of the trials that we saw that got people, and I felt foul of it as well, got quite excited about the potential of autonomous trucking, for example. And then we go into this transition period, and right now we've got a shortage of human truckers. So right now there's a massive increase in the wages for human truckers because most of them are retiring. Most of the Gen Zs don't want to move into trucking. They know it's not a career with a long-term future. So we've got this massive shortage of truck drivers to be able to meet the demand specifically caused by the e-commerce revolution. And then we go into phase two, where actually, because now the wages have risen, the incentive for investment in autonomous vehicles, it suddenly becomes there. And then, we're seeing effectively the scaling of this technology, which is going to create that sort of revolution that I talked about. And that revolution in the industrial world is going to take on three different elements, what I call the triple whammy. So whammy number one is horizontal convergence across the end-to-end supply chain. So this is the automation of all physical tasks from picking, packing, loading, put away, driving. Whammy two is the one that's actually we've seen first, well, which is the automation of knowledge-based tasks. So these are everything from robot or process automation systems, replacing human fingers typing data into our ERP systems, for example. And then whammy number three is the convergence of these technologies together. So effectively machine brains driving the actions of machine hands and seeing automation across the end-to-end supply chain. And as I pointed out, these innovations are going to be completely transformative, but only for those companies who are able to create value from them. Only for those. That's my English is a bit off at the bottom there. Sorry about that. But only for companies that are able to create value from them. And I finished with sort of saying that actually in phase two, what we're going to see is the power supply chain, a much more personalized, much more automated, much more local supply chain that actually is going to bring great benefits, because the shorter the supply chain, the stronger, more agile and more sustainable it will be. We'll make things more when we need them. We will store them locally. You'll use automation to compensate for the cost of human labor, etc. Now, last month we went into webinar 2 and I said, okay, so given that's what's happening, why are so many companies struggling to adapt to this disruption? So given that the future looks nothing like the past and that things are never again going to be as slow right now, are companies keeping up with that pace of change and adapting? And the reality was, of course, they're not. Whilst we're seeing an exponential increase in the capability of technology, we're not seeing that same exponential increase in the ability of people to adapt to that technology or the ability of organizations to restructure themselves. So the reality for most organizations is they're still running very much with analog mindsets in a digital world. And as a result, most organizations are also fragile. They're still sort of embedded with functional and industrial age mindsets, methods and management styles that are really leaving them exposed in the face of this massive wave of change. And I particularly like this Gary Hamel quote here that says, right now your company has 21st century internet-enabled business processes, mid-20th century management processes, all built atop 19th century management principles. And I think for most organizations, that still holds true. And the problem, of course, as I described last month, was that most companies are still operating with that analog mindset. They're still focusing on digitizing their existing processes and ways of working, rather than actually transforming the way the business operates. So I propose that in order to take advantage of all this new wave hardware and software, what we really need is new wave thoughtware. And the question I always ask businesses is, are you actually digitally transforming your business? So you tell me you're doing a digital transformation project. Are you digitally transforming? Or are you just digitizing the old business? And actually, in most cases, people stick their hands up and go, actually, what we're really doing is just digitizing our existing ways of working and our existing processes. Which leads me nicely to today. So we're going through a period of exponential change. Things are going to speed up, not slow down. Companies are struggling. What can they do? Well, here is the thing. This is a really great opportunity for businesses to really test their mettle and to make the transition from being just where a group of people actually come together to undertake, repeatable tasks, to actually starting to collaborate together in order to, constantly work on creating a better business. And as Roosevelt once said, you don't become a skilled sailor by, sailing on smooth seas. And we don't have them right now. So is the rate of change going to slow down? No. Are things going to get easier? No. Is our industrial age companies going to make it? Probably not unless they change something. But is there any way we can learn not just to survive, but to thrive? Absolutely yes. And the thing to do here is to become anti-fragile. Now, I'm going to talk to you what I mean by that term. It's something that's been, it wasn't my term. I didn't come up with it. It came up by a gentleman, a philosopher called Nassim Taleb. But I'm going to explain why resilience is not enough, because everyone talks about being more resilient. So the question I often pose is, if I was the CEO of Blockbuster, going back into the late 90s, early 2000s, if I was to have a supply chain resilience strategy, so if I was to design my supply chain resilience, would that have saved me from Netflix? Would it have saved me from digitization? And the answer, of course, is no. I could have optimize the supply chain of videos and games into my stores, but ultimately the real shift was from entertainment becoming digital and therefore becoming available at the click of a button, taking away all of the customer inconveniences of having to walk to the store and go, to pick what you want, and then the most inconvenient bit, which was return. And in fact, Blockbuster had the chance to purchase Netflix for 50 million to make their business more anti-fragile. They chose not to. They laughed. In fact, they laughed the Netflix founders out of the building, effectively. What they lost sight of was that the purpose of their business was not to provide, physical videos or DVDs or games. The purpose of them was to provide entertainment for people. And the thing is, they've lost sight of that. And that goes for people like Kodak and Instagram as well. If we have, that wouldn't have enabled us to have a more resilient focus on supply chain, until the point in time where actually, the digital photographer reached 2 megabytes. Now, the interesting thing is that Kodak was responsible for the development of the digital camera, but it chose not to take that technology and make it at the forefront of its product development. It saw it purely as a threat to film development. Whereas, again, if it is thought about the fact that its own brand was all around capturing and sharing memories, and it looked at digital as a way to help people to capture more memories and share them more easily, then I'm sure Kodak would be at the front of the digital memory sharing revolution we have right now. Now, we capture more photos and share more memories than ever before, but Kodak is not involved in any meaningful way in that. So again, a focus on resilience would simply not been enough. So what we've got to really realize here is, what got us to this point won't get us there. We need to go beyond trying to be resilient, because the resilience really is defined as the ability for us to withstand shocks, but return to the previous state relatively undamaged. But that's not good enough in a future where, it looks nothing like the past. So going back to that previous state is never going to be enough. And if we look at how supply chains deal with uncertainty, what we see is that sort of 63% of them experience a loss, 28% of them, are either impacted positively or negatively, but 9% have a gain. And this is from sort of 2023 Gartner analysis on anti-fragility. So really what we've got 63% of companies that are fragile, 28% of companies that can say they're resilient, but only 9% companies that are truly anti-fragile. And the question is, of course, what is that 9% doing that the other ones are not? And one of the things they're doing is being able to think more than one chess move ahead. They're able to think ahead and plan, not just react. They're able to move away from deterministic planning and knee-jerk responses, moving to more probabilistic planning and strategic thinking. So if we take this little diagrammatic here where we look at different threats to our business, one of which is political, we talk about the war in Ukraine. There are a number of second-order effects and unintended consequences that could happen as a result of that conflict, and many of those may or may not impact your supply chain. They may impact your ability to sell in certain regions. They may impact your consumer base. And understanding what those different scenarios are and what those different impacts are likely to be so that you can develop a playbook with mitigation tactics in them is absolutely critical for organizations. So we move away from this sort of very reactive mindset. So I'd like to go back to that concept of anti-fragile and how do we go beyond resilience? And as I said, this came from a book, 2012 book from Nassim Nicholas Taleb called Anti-Fragile, Things That Gain from Disorder. And Taleb basically said, there is no word for the opposite of fragile. And therefore he's created one which he calls anti-fragile. And he said anti-fragility is beyond resilience or robustness. The resilient resists shocks and stays the same, whereas the anti-fragile gets better. What I mean here really is that, it's about moving beyond sort of having very functional mindsets. So at this moment, most organizations are fragile because they have I-shaped people working in I-shaped functions. Their focus is on increasing operational efficiency within their span of control. The resilient organization is starting to think end-to-end supply chain. So in my time at Cranfield, we talk a lot about developing T-shaped people in T-shaped teams, where the focus is on maximizing the effectiveness and flow across the chain. And this is certainly a massive improvement from being fragile. And the anti-fragile this is something that I propose here, is that what we want is X-shaped people in X-shaped value networks, where the focus is on creating more value for customers and stakeholders. And I'll talk to you about why I call them X-shaped people. The fragile companies hates uncertainty. So any uncertainty causes internal disruption and post-traumatic stress. The company is damaged by the disruption. The resilient is able to manage the uncertainty. It can create an effective response to disruption. And the anti-fragile loves uncertainty because it gives it an opportunity to be better. It results in learning what I call post-traumatic growth. So whilst the fragile are going to struggle, the resilient will almost certainly survive, but the anti-fragile will thrive. Fragile companies are component thinkers. Their mindset is particularly narrow. The span of control is the function, and their focus is efficiency in the moment. Linear thinkers think more end-to-end. The span of control is the supply chain, and the focus is also in the current, but it's on effectiveness. Whereas exponential thinkers, which is where the X comes from, their mindset is exponential. The span of control is the business model, and their focus is on future expansion. They don't let go of the current. We obviously have to execute. We have to deliver on the day-to-day, but we're also thinking about how we improve. So the analogy that I like to use, a lot of people, when you think about fragile companies, you think about sort of bone china. You drop it, it smashes. Fragile companies aren't like that. They don't go from functioning to destroyed in one moment. What they do is they operate like a non-Newtonian liquid. So for those of you, and I'm sure most of you are aware, things like cornstarch and water, oobleck, it's something that looks like a liquid, operates like a liquid, but it's quite a viscous liquid. So it flows, but it flows slowly. And that's fragile companies. They do, everything happens, but there's a lot of feels like things, walking through treacle to get things done. However, if you apply force to that business, then it stiffens immediately, because what happens is people get focus on their very narrow span of control, and they stop collaborating, stop communicating, stop integrating. So everything takes longer and costs more, even though you're under more pressure. The resilient company, the analogy I like to use is the Da Vinci bridges. So for those who don't know, Da Vinci bridge is basically a bridge that is held up by its own components, has no fixtures and fittings. And what happens when you put pressure on top of a Da Vinci bridge is the components lean against each other, put pressure against each other, but that strengthens them. So the integration of departments actually means that, they work well to manage the disruption, to get through it, and they come out relatively unscathed, but they're still a bridge. It's still got the same functions it has before. And the best example I think I can think of really for the anti-fragile company is kind of like the human muscular system and the process of hypertrophy. So if I was to go and do a set of heavy bench presses, then what I'm going to cause is trauma. I'm going to cause micro tears to my chest muscles. But if I went back and did that again afterwards, I would find that exercise would be a little bit easier. The damage caused would be less. My body has effectively learnt from the experience and adapted to that. So I'm now stronger and better than I was before. And if I keep doing that, I'm going to increasingly be able to handle more weight and get more stronger. So anti-fragile company is one that adapts and actually gets stronger as a result of the disruption. So all companies right now are facing a lot of challenges. They're trying to got these analog industrial mindsets that are struggling to adapt in a digital world. We've got increasingly complex supply chain networks, and we've got exponentially increasing technological and process complexity. The challenge, therefore, is to try and understand how technology changes the customer's job to be done and how you service it. And that enables you to be able to, it requires you to open your mind and think differently about how you can deliver value. In order to understand these complex supply chain networks, you need to understand the goals of the systems and how the different nodes connect, relate, and integrate, so that you can redesign a system using potential technology to increase the effective delivery of those strategic goals. And from a technological perspective, really the key is here, complexity grows naturally, whereas simplicity has to be consciously designed, point I'm going to make again in a moment. So really try and seek out the inherent simplicity at the heart of the system and use technology to remove barriers to value and make jobs simpler and more convenient. So really, our response should be like this. We need to reimagine what we do and how we do it and constantly look at the way we do it. And it doesn't mean we have to change everything. It just means we have to stay at the forefront of thinking about how the external world is changing so that we can manage our internal responses. We then can redesign our systems to adapt to that, and then look also in that redesigning to simplify, to make things easier as possible. And that's a combination of three things there. Critical thinking, then critical thinking about our systems, and then critical thinking about how we actually handle the things, which is an element of design thinking. So the combination of critical thinking, systems thinking, and design thinking brought together effectively is the approach we're looking at here, and how to become anti-fragile. So from a critical thinking perspective, what we're talking about is being able to look at our organization with an open mind, look at the systems that are involved in it, and then think about how we can actually design it for success with as simple as possible. So reimagine, open your mindset to new ways of working, new decisions and new value propositions. Understand the end-to-end network, its interrelationships and interdependencies, so that you can redesign how it delivered these value propositions. And then simplify. Engineer the system for customer user simplicity and convenience, removing friction, non-value add elements, and any barriers to value. So take that in more detail. Critical thinking is about reimagining. So going back to first principles, who are your desired customers? What is their job to be done? What are the problems that are involved? Where are their pain points? What is the pain point visibility? Is it sustainability? Is it CO2 reduction? Is it risk mitigation? What is the things that they're trying to solve that you potentially could help them with? Does technology change their job to be done, or does it even change your offering? Try and reject this one-size-fits-all model. Think business models and segment on value, and I'll talk about that in a moment. And then consider radically different ways to solve these problems. And then once we understand what the customer is trying to achieve and how we actually fit into that, then we can start to look at the systems, understand our current system, and then think about what our future systems look like. One of the aspects of that is understanding where our key decision points are, and what a good decision looks like, which decisions lead to success, which ones lead to failure, and trying to codify good decisions into the system. To be able to codify good decisions, you need to understand second order effects and unintended consequences. And to do that, you need to understand the integration between different processes and the impact they have on each other. And then finally, as I said, use a bit of design thinking to say, rather than just add increasing more technological and process complexity, step back. What is it we're trying to achieve? What does technology enable us to do? Where does the system start and end? How can we simplify it? Try and design it for flow and to minimize the amount of friction in the process as much as possible. So let's look a bit about critical thinking. Challenge here is that we want to have digital mindsets for the digital age. So successful digital transformation is not about tools and technology. It's about transforming the mindset, the culture, and the strategy of the organization. The problem with transformation really isn't ever the fact that we lack ideas. It's the fact that they never really manifest themselves into a change in our thinking or a change in our behavior. And this is where new startups win. So new startups can set up saying, right, don't need to make profit for the next 5 years. I can think exactly about what it is the customer actually wants. I can look exactly at what new technologies are out there, and I can design a business around delivering value to customers as expediently and as smoothly as possible. Whereas more traditional businesses are weighed down by their, sort of the legacy culture, their legacy technology, their legacy thinking, the fact that people internally are wedded to the old ways of doing things. Maybe they were the people involved in setting the business up that way or setting the processes, and they don't want to let it go. So they're almost held back by the past. And the thing to understand, doing these digital projects, they're not projects. It's actually a journey, not a destination, but it gives you the opportunity to make a paradigm shift in your mindset and an opportunity to redefine what you stand for, how you operate, and what you reward. And these skills are critical. So this was a piece of research from back at the end of last year by Constellation Research out of Silicon Valley. And they said that the big skills needed in order to make use of tools like Gen AI is effectively critical thinking and problem solving, as well as creative thinking and design thinking. So these are really, really saleable skills. They're also going to be massively in demand skills for businesses. And the reason I use this quote from Mark Twain, which I love, which is because it's not what you don't know that gets you into trouble, because we're in a world of uncertainty. Most people don't know what the future looks like. The problem comes when we're so wedded to what we already know. And even companies like Unilever are realizing that actually if we can let go of the past, there are significant benefits for us. So, Mark Engel, who was when I spoke to him, he was the chief supply chain officer. He isn't now, he's left, but he said, we found out, Sean, that every dollar we spend on agility has probably got a 10x return on every dollar we spent on forecasting. And Bish over there, who's the EVP of Supply Chain Beauty, he sort of said, the reason for that is agility trumps accuracy. It gives us resilience, but that flies in the face of everything that we've been taught in the downswing when it was all about efficiency. We were focusing continuously on forecast accuracy. Now what we realized is, no forecast ever going to be accurate. And the real key is, how do we redesign our systems for agility? And the ability of you to think like that is that will be the thing that basically determines your success or failure. So again, I like Alvin Toffler's quote here that says, "The illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn." And actually, of the three things there, the unlearning is the one that is the most dangerous, because if we can't do that, then we almost create an unwillingness to relearn or learn new things. We hold on too much to this what we already know. And Wendy Herrick, again from a Unilever, said, we believe, because we'd shot up the Gartner top 25, that we knew it all. And then we were looking at technologies like decision intelligence, for example, and realized that we were trying to digitize our existing way of doing business. And actually, when we step back and go, how do we reframe this so that we use this technology in such a way that it actually gets its full value from it, so that we codify our decisions rather than trying to digitize our processes? And then they got a completely exponential level of benefit that they just didn't expect. So we need to be a little bit like the seagull. We need to challenge status quos. And as Einstein says, we can't solve our problems with the same thinking we used to create them. So we do need to be able to think differently here. And this is obviously why this is the first point, because if we can't do this, if we can't critically think, if we can't open our minds to new ways of operating, then when we go into our systems elements or we go into our design thinking, we're already constrained by our mental models, and we're limiting ourselves to the way things used to be done. We've always sort of said that, if we, certainly from Cranfield, with Professor Martin Christopher, one of my colleagues there, says, we move from a world where, companies, brands and products compete into a world where supply chain compete. I actually think now anti-fragile thinking is about business models competing, and competing on the ability to deliver customer value as conveniently and as simply as possible. What do I mean by business model? Well, here's an example I'd like to use. And you can use the business model canvas or things like that. But really what we're talking about is defining a specific customer segment, having a unique value proposition to deliver to that customer segment, and then aligning your operations, having a set of fit of your operational capabilities to deliver that value proposition to that customer, so that you understand the different demand channels your customer is receiving or communicating with that value proposition, developing products and services, and then having a supply network. So the 3Ds, as I call them, we're focusing on delighting the customer, developing new ways to deliver value, and then making sure we deliver. And then, of course, what we have in the core of this business model is the strategy that brings them all together. So if we think about the different customer segments and the value propositions here and how do we delight them, really what we need to do is not be tied into the same trap that Kodak and Blockbuster fell into, by just limiting ourselves around our existing business model. And the example I like to use is the light bulb wasn't a result of continuous improvement projects to the candle, nor did we get a motor car because we did a lot of tweaks to the horse. They came about because of radical thinking, and that's really what we need to have in our organization. So, for example, every business in the world is now facing this sort of ESG challenge. The fragile organization will look at that and go, right, well, I need to do some reporting and recycling. This is being done to me. So I need to find some time and capacity for each of my functional leads to go out and be able to report on the parts that they impact on our carbon footprint, for example. The resilient organization will actually say, well, rather than being done to us, why don't we make that part of our operations? And maybe there's from green, we can get lean. Maybe we can start to redo some repair and we can make some cost savings here. So maybe this is just as important as, as other elements in our business, like cash flow and profit. And in fact, actually, it might drive us to generate more cash flow or profit because of our focus on green/lean. The anti-fragile will go, well, this is the direction of travel. ESG is going to be the future. Every company is going to have to do that. Can we not only solve our own ESG problems, but actually our customers' ESG problems? And maybe it is a business model there that we can make at the center of our business. So now we can look at new ways to use sustainability and circularity as a driver for new value propositions. And that's the different mindset shift. So rather than just seeing it as something that's being done to them or something we need to do as just a matter of course, actually putting that saying, how do we generate new business models that actually helps our customers succeed with this challenge, not just ourselves? And the way you do that is by going back to first principles, looking at outcomes, not activities. So, most companies would sell capabilities. So in this example, a drill kit and a tool set. And for those of you who don't know, the average life usage time of a drill in most people have a drill. The usage time is 18 minutes in its life. It gets a hole made. So Clayton Christensen from Harvard said, people don't want a 1/4 inch drill bit, they want a 1/4 inch hole. This is what they actually want. I disagree. I don't think people want holes all over the house. So what they actually want to do is they want to hang a picture or a mirror or something on there. So if the fragile company would look at technologies and say, well, how do we make drills more profitably? The resilient company would say, well, actually, maybe we can do drills as a service. Maybe we can servitize this, and there's a business model to be made in having holes as a service. The anti-fragile would say, what is it the customer is actually trying to do? And is there an opportunity to pivot our business to enable the customer to do that easier, more simpler, and to create a new competitive position for my company that the others don't have? And then once you understand what that offering looks like, then you look at the systems. Because companies do not rise to the level of the goals, you fall to the level of your systems. And I'll go back to that slide because I skipped it. So really, this is about understanding the end-to-end system and its complexity, processing the interrelationships and their interconnections, understand the data feedback loops, understand second-order effects and unintended consequences, and analyze problems critically from a data and decision-based perspective. And then once you understand the current system, you can then think about how can you redesign that to deliver those goals to your customers better. So what we're really looking at here is looking across our business model and going, what are the sales that actually generate value, sales that delight the customer? Which ones do we need to maintain and which ones do we reduce? There's a really good book called Islands of Profit in a Sea of Red Ink by a writer called J.L. Byrne. I think he was from Harvard, or that might have been Stanford. And he basically says that for the analysis that he's done, by any measure, 40 to 60% of any company is unprofitable, but it's masked by the 10 to 20% that's highly profitable. And the challenge for most businesses is they don't know which is which. Understanding which is which enables you to be able to grow the sales that actually do deliver real profit and reduce the ones that destroy that. And then, of course, on this side, on the operations side, you can start to look at the cost creators. So there are costs that you have in your business that create value, and you need to become more effective at the delivery of those. There are costs that you need to absorb that are essential, but not necessarily value creating. You need to become more efficient. And there are costs that simply destroy value. And the key there is to eliminate them. And then you build a team that looks across that elements to say, how do we deliver this value proposition to that customer segment in the most effective way possible? So now what we can start to do is define and align the commercial and supply chain strategies and metrics. So we can start to look at the commercial strategy for that business model. Are we focusing? Do we win on price or innovation or quality or user experience, sustainability? And then what's the supply chain model that should be aligned with the commercial strategy? So if it's price, we're probably going to be focused on cost. If it's innovation, it might be, on responsiveness, or it might not be any of those factors. If it's quality, of course, we need to have a matching supply chain model, and then nothing that destroys the quality. If it's all about user experience, it's probably going to be agility and responsiveness, that sort of thing. So the demand side team works to accentuate the differentiating factors and make sure they align the activities, and the supply side team work together across the value chain. So you work together as an integrated team, and then once you understand the system, you align your technological investments to those commercial strategies so that you can start to think about where we can, create new value or increase effectiveness or improve the efficiency or simply remove waste and eliminate barriers to value. So we're looking at a strategic mindset to these new technologies that are coming. And then you can basically look across at these different technologies independently, from RPA to autonomous vehicles to smart automated warehouse systems and things, and start ask yourself questions. Can it help us to be even more responsive or more agile or more cost appropriate in our different supply chains to meet the needs of the business, depending on what that business model is? And then finally, we come into simplification. So just because the external world is becoming increasingly more complex, resist the urge to increase the complexity within the system. In order to thrive in a more complex world, the focus really needs to be on simplification, not complication. And as Da Vinci once said, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. And one of my favorite quotes is, I think it's Hemingway's quote that said, you know, I was going to write you a short letter, but I didn't have the time, so I wrote you a long one instead. Simplification actually takes time, effort, and mental thought to do that, whereas just adding complexity doesn't. So focus on actually being able to simplify the problem. The problem is that, as I say, complexity grows naturally, whilst simplicity has to be consciously designed, which is the prime opportunity at this age. Can we use all of these new technologies to simplify processes, procedures, and products behind the delivery of these new desired customer outcomes? It's not easy, and that's why most people don't do it. They prefer the passive security of independently reacting to events as and when they happen, which just simply allows complexity to spread because we're sticking plasters on problems all over the place, rather than looking at the whole system and thinking about how we can simplify that. So again, I'm going to skip that slide because of time. Organizations can't rely on technology alone. They must overcome cultural barriers and define a framework and set of behaviors. So what do I mean by that? It means by going from fragile to anti-fragile, slightly different goals. We're going from maximizing value from shareholders to stakeholders, from protecting your slice of the market to focusing on new business models and growing new pies. It changes our structure. So we're moving away from a top-down Frederick Winslow Taylor kind of command and control model to being able to have teams that work together where ideas can come to anywhere, where they're empowered, enabled, and focusing on value. The mindset changes from a very fixed mindset where we're protecting what we already know to a growth mindset where we embrace uncertainty, we focus on solving problems, we look continuously to add more value, and we embrace uncertainty. And finally, a different culture where we move away from strict adherence to rules and relying on past knowledge and experience and avoiding risk and blaming people when they take one, to enabling creating a culture where we have the freedom to challenge, where it's all about inquiry and creativity and experimentation, and where we move from playing not to lose and move instead into playing to win. And I'll finish with really sort of leaving you with this, that you really need also to remember for your team that we still live in a human-centric world. While machines make and move products, they can't imagine what products to make. Machines can create images from text and they write books, but they can't determine what images to create or what books to write. They can help make decisions, but they cannot decide what decisions are important or what outcomes are good. They can help us find trends in large amounts of data, but they still don't know what to do with that information. They can help us to find answers to questions, but they still don't know what questions to ask. There's some machines are a what, sometimes a how, but they are never a why. And that's where you and your people come in, where human creativity, imagination, and entrepreneurship comes in. So nothing we do can change the past. Everything we do change the future. This second phase that we're about to enter presents you with an opportunity to redefine what your organization stands for, how it operates, what it rewards. And I call out to you, a plea to you, take it. Go beyond just being resilient. Focus on becoming anti-fragile. Change your mindset, change your future. Thank you.
Sean,
Alistair, back to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sean. Absolutely exceptional as always, and really appreciate you taking the time to run through this with us. It really has summed up the last 3 webinars, which I've personally found very, very insightful. To everyone on the call, if you do have any questions, there doesn't seem to be anything in the chat at the moment that we could get Sean to ask. But if you have got questions, please come back to us directly. I just want to say, Sean, thanks again. It really has been exceptional. I would highly recommend to everyone on the call to read your book, because I am finding it again insightful. And hopefully we'll have you back in the next few months to come back and do another series of these. Thanks again.
Thank you, Alistair. Thank you, everyone on the call. Hope you enjoyed that. Thank you. Have a good day.
Have a good one, everybody.